So yeah, we're going to talk about well-being in STEM. I think is this, might have to move some things around. So these are the kind of things that I decided to cover for today. I want to cover more, but there's only so much time. So we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, kind of cultures of organizations. I'd like to hear about what your organizational culture is like. And excellence. We're going to talk about what's this idea of excellence, because there's a lot of organizations that say, we want excellence in our the way that we do things and in our staff. Thanks, Shruti. And mentoring. We'll talk about mentoring, and I think mentoring is also connected to some of our values and some of our own culture. And I use culture in the most broadest sense, so not just ethnic culture, but I mean, everything has a culture to it. It has some unwritten rules to it that people learn about how they're supposed to behave. And then we'll talk about mentoring and how that's really important also for well-being. But we'll talk about some well-being strategies as well. And I'd like, again, to hear what your well-being strategies are, because we're all experts by experience of life. So it'd be interesting to hear what you guys have as well. Just trying to figure out the best way to do this. So I did this kind of like cloud template and kind of below the clouds, or, the more hard things to deal with for us are things like imposter syndrome, excellence, and whether we measure up to things, and the organizational culture might not be conducive to our well-being either. So I'm going to talk about those three things first. So the original definition of imposter syndrome, as I gave it to you, and as we kind of talked about, really missed the context about class, gender, race, or even your context in general. And a lot of the they didn't study women of color or effects of classism. So a lot of the fixes that they came up with in terms of how we fix this, if you've ever seen, like, here's a power pose, and, how to deal with imposter syndrome by looking in the mirror and, telling yourself that you're, that you belong, that you're, worth something, all those things, those fixes, if you look at them, they're about fixing the person, fixing the woman, fixing the Black woman, not fixing where those people work. And so it basically pathologizes, a kind of universal discomfort that we all have, and makes it feel like, oh, you have imposter syndrome. I'm going to diagnose you with imposter syndrome. These are the things that you need to do to fix yourself. And yeah, I mean, the question was, would men feel this? And I think, a lot of times men are validated over time. So when you're validated, your doubt of whether you belong somewhere is going to start to dissipate. But if you're not validated in that, and you're constantly questioned about whether you can lead. So one of my colleagues at a world-leading university was subjected to an interview when she applied for a grant. And it was one of those early career grants for funding to support her, evolution in becoming a established researcher. So she was an early career researcher, and it was to give her a lot of money so that she could develop her own research. And she had a lot of kind of not co-authors, but support authors, or co-investigators, but that were under her, right? That she would be leading. And all of them just happened to be men, because a lot of men are in evolutionary psychology. So she had all these men as the co-applicants, and she went into the meeting, and they actually asked her, how do you think that you can manage these, high-profile men that you have on your grant? Do you think that you could actually lead them and give them directions and tell them what to do and stuff? And it's just like, are you kidding me? So she had to, stand there and justify her leading on a project And she, you know, already had tons of publications. It was ridiculous. So, you know, no one questions also the way that maybe, you know, men work. So the manner in which they do things. Perhaps they do things in a very, again, you know, kind of assertive way, whereas maybe an assertive woman would have that questioned about, you know, whether she could change her tone, for example. Also, the ownership of contributions, their competence to do something is questioned. So we see, you know, kind of overcoming imposter syndrome. In our own university, we have Wellbeing Week. We have, somebody was telling me she got sent some Nivea and some teas from her organization. You know, there's all these individual solutions that are usually caused by the systems of discrimination that we are a lot of times find ourselves in. So that's difficult to deal with. And I think, you know, one thing from that article, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome, that I really connected with was the answer to overcoming imposter syndrome is not to fix individuals, but to create an environment that fosters a variety of leadership styles and in which diverse racial, ethnic, and gender identities are seen as just as professional as the default model. So it's not just about confidence, assertiveness, but there's other ways that we can say this is a professional person. Any comments about that? I also read, I didn't ask you to read this one, but I can share it with you afterward. But just thinking about the cultural aspects and the different experiences. Somebody shared an article about computational science and how we can take some of the ideas that have been put forth on the experiences of Black women in the field, and especially being Black in, sorry, my door keeps like making noise. But taking experiences within computational science, so things like machine learning, you know, and machine learning of different faces, and how the early designs really, and possibly even now a lot of times, don't take into account facial features that are, you know, non-white. The idea that a lot of the designs for motion detection, for, you know, bathroom hand dryers might not recognize different brown bodies. You know, all these things in computational science, is in computational neuroscience, for example, is the area that the authors work in, don't recognize these. So that's on the design element and how these things are created by scientists, but also on the other end of a person working within that environment. When they're brought in to work in, it feels tokenistic, is what they were describing it as. And actually, Monica had told me a book that she'd read that I've started reading called Presumed Incompetent. And it has Latina and Black experiences in mainly America. It's an American book, so it's mainly in the US context. But how, you know, that kind of tokenism plays out. And I thought these couple of quotes in here that I'll share. So many Black women, as many people, generally arrive at computational sciences without much formal training in detecting and tackling systemic oppression. So once inside the system, they're pressured to kind of change themselves and acquiesce to the status quo and cultivate ignorance or at least tolerance of systemic oppression. And, you know, you're basically rewarded for capitulating to the systems in which you find yourself in as a Black woman. And those Black women who accept the system are likely to be rewarded, but at a significant personal cost. So again, that well-being. And also, if you take the chance at challenging the system, you run the risk of being ostracized. And so there's these structural and interpersonal components of computational sciences that makes it difficult for Black women to describe, let alone flourish in their environment, and a lot of times will leave those environments. I heard of a university in the US South where they hired 6 Black assistant professors, so not full professors. And within 5 years, a lot of those people were gone because the system did not allow them to thrive and flourish within that. So although they were hiring people, they were not changing the system in which those people were trying to operate. And there's, more things about, having training in critical race studies for people who go into these, into academia and into computational neuroscience, into STEM, that those are really important for people to have knowledge of about how to change the system, because a lot of times you don't even recognize that you're within that system until it's, you're quite entrenched in the way that they work. So this is I'll just show you the top of it so you can, but I'll send it to you guys as a PDF later as well. And yeah, I follow Olivia Guest on Twitter and she's amazing. So again, it's about changing the systems, not the individuals. It's also seen in the way we think about excellence. So we'll go through this and then maybe take like a 5-minute break, if that's okay. So I found this article called Excellence R Us, kind of making fun of, Toys R Us. And they talk about how the idea of excellence is endemic. So, it's seen, it defines success in academic endeavor from Montreal to Mumbai. You talk about the USC Center for Excellence, the University of Tokyo Global Center for Excellence, Office of Excellence in Multicultural Student Success. It's seen in athletic training programs. It's everywhere. So people always talk about, excellence as the thing that we should all be striving for in the world's top research institutes, for example. But what does it actually mean? And how do you define it? And how do you measure it? This is when we get into metrics that put people at risk because they don't make any sense to what people actually value when you guys were talking about knowledge and learning and sharing your knowledge and learning. So excellence tells us nothing about how important the science is and everything about who decides about excellence. So we need to challenge these expectations about, what does it mean to be the best at science, and the culture of excellence and the quality of work from those who do not work in the expected normative fashion, right? So those who are challenging the system will be unrecognized and underestimated. If you ever feel unrecognized and underestimated, is that because you don't fit into the way that people are measuring excellence? And, in whatever capacity that is, and however you identify. If you don't identify, as a white, middle-class, rich man, heterosexual, in whatever way this is, a lot of people are not going to fit in this. So yeah, it'll create social barriers to participation in research by, underrepresented groups. And you can see this one academic, they said, if you can find me a single academic who hasn't had to, bluff or lie or embellish to get grants, then I will find you an academic who is in trouble with his head of department. So, this kind of competitive requirement of, kind of boasting and, exaggerating what you've actually achieved in order to show competence to be given a grant. And, I had somebody tell me who was Finnish working in London as a professor. She said, Luna, you're like the worst American I've ever met, because you don't exaggerate your accomplishments, and you have to do that if you want to make it in this world. And I was like, Well, I'm also Puerto Rican, so I don't really fall into that American system. All right, see you later, Cecilia. So, that's what's expected in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish. But no agency, ministry, press, or research office, intentionally uses excellence as shorthand for able to embellish results or importance convincingly. So, we're adjudicated by this system of embellishment, although it's not stated directly by anyone. Nobody's saying you need to exaggerate your accomplishments. So again, it's this unwritten culture that we need to just, absorb by osmosis. And again, this leads to bias within institutions of research against women, underrepresented ethnic groups, non-traditional centers of scholarship, and other disadvantaged groups. And this is a problem because, the best science comes from everyone being involved. It's so nonsensical to eliminate people, more than half of the population, the global majority, from research that is going to benefit us all. It's just, when you think about what we're trying to achieve and establish a knowledge base, we're not going to have that if we don't have participation from everybody. So the article says that we need to promote, capacity, capacity in organizations, breadth, soundness, comprehensiveness, accessibility, integrity, things that actually matter. Rather, the soundness of research, is it done well? The breadth of what the research is accomplishing or studying, the accessibility to the outside world, the dissemination, the knowledge transfer that a lot of you are involved in, the comprehensiveness of that research, and capacity building in everyone. So, part of my job is to get people who are service users of the mental health system to become involved in research and actually direct what research gets done next. That's building capacity for everyone to be involved in research, whether you have a background in the scientific process or not. Anyone can learn it. I thought that was a really good article about how do we define what success is for research. But this could be applied to anything that we do in organizations, rather than a winner-take-all measure of effectiveness within our institutions. And I think a lot of you were talking about networks, building networks, making connections, developing knowledge. All of that really, I think, leads to a different kind of success measure than what's there. So if you feel like an imposter, it might be that your values, what you're trying to achieve, doesn't match what people are measuring, is my point there. There was a new Wellcome Trust research study done across the world. I think it's mainly UK, but it's international research of over 4,000 individuals in a survey of the culture of research where they work. And they're really working towards improving research culture over time. So they also had a word cloud of how they would describe their research culture. And a lot of you talk about, like I think Cecilia or other people talked about this kind of competitiveness. You can see, things like toxic is in there, elitist, right? So, people assume, for example, Carrie comes from an elite background, and, competitive, stressed, and pressured, and metrics are huge in there. But, thankfully also collaborative. I mean, for me, that's a really important part of what I enjoy is the collaborative nature of it, and not so much the kind of hierarchical, insecure, part of it. So there's a lot to be done. And somebody described that I think stress is an intrinsic problem of the research culture. Speaking to human resources, I don't think they really understand that. I had to explain to somebody quite recently that researchers often see their job as rather more important than a job. So it's a way of life kind of thing. Something for an outsider, it's not easy for them to understand. And that was something that when I left, the regular jobs I was doing, I've worked in fast food, I've worked in, department stores, I've worked in entertainment. And they said, why are you doing a PhD? And I said, I want that really to be my life. I want my work to be my life. But what the risk of that is that you have stressors and pressure that is really hard to maintain your well-being and sense of self. Many interviewees said they faced long working hours and high expectations. 57% reported long hours culture. And when people used words to describe their research culture, you can see that 55% of the words that they used were more negative words. 33% had positive words to describe the research culture that they find themselves in. And this affects, creativity. I think having an art background, like Michelle talked about, is really important because I think, that kind of keeping that creativity up. I used to write poetry when I was a teenager, and a few years ago, started to write poetry again because I'd abandoned it. I was like, well, now I'm a researcher. Now I write this. I don't want to write in any other way. And I actually just forced myself to do a poem about my research, and it was really a lot of fun, and it got my creative juices flowing again, where then I wanted to do things more creatively. Creativity, so we can see here, creativity is stifled due to research being driven by an impact agenda or emphasis on impact. 75% agree with that. But creativity is welcome. They just feel that they can't do it. So although a lot of our job is about creativity, it's really difficult to do in the environment that we find ourselves in. Unhealthy competition being present is another thing that people noted. High levels of competition have created unkind and aggressive research conditions. 78% agreed with that assessment. So competition isn't really going to, we know that most research and most impactful research and most knowledge generating research is about inclusion of lots of minds in it. And a competition is not going to serve that if somebody feels like, well, I need to be the leader in this, and I need to, show my ownership of it. And that can stifle this kind of collaborative working environment. And when they talked about being managed, this is something that I talked about earlier. The manager's impression was 80% felt like they could lead people well. But when researchers' experience was shared, they talked about most of the time that they were being led or managed, it was about discussing performance. So 55% said it was just about discussing their performance rather than maybe supporting their well-being, was only 32%. Providing career advice and guidance was only 34%. Connected you to others within the field, 34%. You would think that should be way higher, of connecting people to other people outside in their field or outside the field. Requested your feedback on their management of you, 11%. So they're not looking for feedback on how well they're managing people. And also bullying and harassment. So 61% had witnessed bullying or harassment. 43% had experienced some kind of bullying or harassment in their workplace. And a lot of this was about, kind of gender. Again, this is the research community, UK and international, but probably more UK-based. Gender was a big part of it, race, ethnicity, in terms of witnessing. So people maybe say things in private that they're not willing to say in front of the people who are affected by that. That might be why these numbers are so different. I remember at previous university I worked at, somebody said, oh, she got promoted because she has 3 kids. So she took lots of maternity leave and was able to get some research done. So we all know, like, it's a walk in the park having children. It just gives us all the opportunities in life. So that's really concerning as well. And in terms of well-being support in their workplace, you know, people said 96% agree, you know, well-being is fundamental to being able to work effectively. But in terms of being well supported, you know, only 49% agree with that. And only 28% say that well-being initiatives are appropriate to their needs. And a lot of people had received help for anxiety or depression, you know, 31%. But in terms of, you know, having a hopeful future, words that people described as their ideal research culture was supportive, creative, collaborative, secure, open, diverse, fair, inclusive, honest, you know, with integrity. And I think that's what we hope we can achieve for the future. And it's nice to see that this is the ideal. And if we can imagine that future, perhaps it can be within our grasp. I'm going to move on to the more kind of positive things that we can do for the future. So this is above the clouds. Below the clouds were imposter syndrome, the culture, the metrics of excellence. But what can we look forward to? Well, I think thinking about mentors, and we, you know, kind of brushed up on that a little bit. So I think there's a difference, though, between having a coach versus having a mentor versus having an advocate. You know, coaching is about somebody helping you decide what your future holds. So it's about asking the tough questions, but allowing you to answer them. And I think that's an important, you know, all these things are important to have, but recognizing what you're getting and what you need at the time is really important. Do you need a coach? Do you need somebody to ask you the tough questions, who can ask you the questions that are going to allow you to have insight into, you know, what your values are, where you're going? Because a lot of times people were lost and get carried away in the flow of, oh yes, this is the next stage in life for me. I go and I don't question it. And I think asking those tough questions are important. A mentor is somebody who is going to share their advice. This is how I did things. They might use some coaching, you know, techniques, but it's really about sharing their experience and helping you in your journey by understanding what helped in their journey, and helping, you know, to break down what the culture is in the organization and help you manage it and navigate it. An advocate is somebody who's going to advocate for your position and for your journey going forward. So I think a lot of mentors should be advocates. I think supervisors should be advocates. They should be saying, look, you need to meet this next person. I mean, it sounds like everybody's doing that. Like, this person's selling themselves short. They need to be out there. You need to be on this website. You know, your story needs to be out there. That's more of an advocating position. And you need people like that in your life. You need those people to really connect you and to be saying, look at this person over here. We need to be advocating for them. I think there's different reasons for having mentors that are internal or external to your organization. Maybe think more broadly than within your organization. Who's out there being a mentor or coach or advocate for you that might not be in your career choice? It might be a different. So for me, a big advocate and mentor was when I was working at Warner Brother Records in Hollywood, which was one of the jobs that I got through like a job placement service when I moved to California because I wanted to do a PhD out there. Didn't work out, but I did get a job in entertainment. And my boss for my PhD research statement, he wasn't a psychologist, he wasn't a scientist. but he thought about people, and he was like, and he was a manager, so he'd had to sell himself a whole bunch of times to get that position. And he said, this is how you do that, Luna. I'm going to help you write your CV, which was amazing. And I'm glad that I opened myself up to that mentorship. But I still, to this day, thank him. I'm like, Stephen, you were the reason why I'm here, and was able to get into this industry. So it might not be somebody within your industry. It could be somebody outside. It could be a parent. It could be, your aunt and uncle. My aunt was a pharmacist in Puerto Rico, and my godmother. And she was a big source of inspiration. It could be, the fact that you have somebody who will babysit for children. It might be somebody who makes you food. Because at the end of the day, if somebody's feeding you, you can have more time to devote to yourself or to your career, or makes you a packed lunch, perhaps. These are things that are also mentoring, and I think are useful to consider. But also, as you're making lists of who your internal and external, kind of mentors, are there any gaps that you need to fill? When I was looking at some careers recently, there was a gap in, the people that were telling me that this career was really good and safe for me to enter. I really needed to hear from women of color. I really, because of the experiences that I've had in the last 10 years here, I feel there's been some in my new job, or the job that I've had recently in the last 4 years. I felt like over time, I'd realized there was a lot more racist things going on than I was happy with. And there were conversations that I didn't feel were the best environment for me to stay in. And I didn't feel that equality, diversity, inclusion, leadership was valued at the top levels as well within the university. So I want to speak to someone who's a woman of color. So it's about, I need to then reach out to somebody who had that background, who had any diverse background, and say, what are you finding? I'm thinking about joining this organization. What are you finding? So I think finding those gaps in your mentoring and trying to fill them, because it might be something where you have, a professor, who can tell you things about what their experiences are, but it's, it needs to be specific to where you would like to be and what your passions are and important issues are. Do we have time to kind of go through, or maybe for afterward, and then I can comment on them? So if you go to this Padlet, and then on your, afterward, write some internal, external mentors in these columns, and then we can, comment on them. I can turn on commenting. Right now I have turned on where you can give thumbs up to different internal and external, maybe people will come up with something that you hadn't thought of before as a mentor and realize, actually, I do get support from a person like that. So this is open for you guys to edit as you see fit. And so we'll leave that for you for next time. But there are, very important things about internal when you're thinking about whether you're going for promotion, whether you're considering whether a management track is good for you, exploring different in-house functions, and how to advance in an organization. Then an internal to the organization is helpful. If you want to know about in general, what are people doing within this organization that might be helpful, that's why my professor friend from London is a good person to just kind of check in with and be like, this is the way it is in my organization. What's your advice? And I think it's important to think about people who are external to your organization in general as well. So this is blank right here because I want to hear, does anybody have well-being strategies that they use in the chat? Anything that you find helpful, or if you want to unmute and just talk. It could be creative things that you do. So for me, writing poems was quite, useful for a while. My strategies change. We know that with stress, one thing is noticing when you're stressed and recognizing the physiological responses to stress. So maybe you don't realize it in your mind that you're feeling overwhelmed, but your stomach is a little bit tight. You have an irritable bowel, perhaps. We know that when people are stressed, usually your stomach contracts at a rate of 3 per minute. When you're stressed, that goes down to nothing. It's very bad if you have eaten, because when you eat, your stomach actually goes into an oscillation of about 6 to 9. But if you're then stressed and it's going to 3, then you're really not digesting the food. You're not really getting the nutrients out of the food. It's just sitting there. It has an effect on your immune system. You might get colds more often. It has an effect, again, on your blood pressure, cardiovascular system. You might feel your heart, racing, jittery, and, not feeling your fingers, headaches. I've had a stress headache recently. Did not like that. I felt nauseous. But yeah, those are the kind of signs to be paying attention to and knowing that you're feeling stressed. In terms of well-being, there's a lot of different things from around the world. So I've been going to do capoeira. It's a Brazilian martial arts. One of the things I've been learning is about drumming. And apparently, kind of drumming and those kind of like repetitive types of tapping are really helpful for people. Breathing exercises, definitely. Breathing exercises and progressive muscle relaxation that you can combine with those breathing exercises. So, just kind of closing your eyes and then tightening up your face as much as possible, tightening up your jaw, tightening everything, just feeling everything tighten and then just loosen it up. And you can tell when you've been tightening. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you don't realize that you're doing this until you tighten everything up and then you let it go. Tightening up your shoulders as much as possible and then breathing out and letting it go. And doing that progressively down your body, tightening up everything in your torso and then letting it go. Tightening up your hips and then letting it go. Tightening up your thighs and letting it go. And as you do that, you'll feel a lot less stressed if you combine that with your breathing. Jogging, exercising, finding friends to talk about work. Like I said, the mentoring and networks and well-being are hugely intertwined. Going out for walks. Yes, nature. Nature is so important. Going and just saying hi to a tree. I actually hugged a tree physically, for real. One time when I was feeling really upset, just went to the park and just gave the tree a hug when I couldn't hug other people with COVID. That's so important, is having nature. I've also been journaling and writing. Also dancing and singing. For me, I've always really liked dancing. In my country, we dance a lot of salsa. And I've been doing a lot more Latin dancing and learning about that. I wanted to show you a video of some positive dancing and singing, but also could be used for, I'm going to just share again because I don't think it'll work if I don't share the sound. And that was a march when they were trying to get rid of the governor who was doing a lot of bad things, and they actually won that fight. And yeah, I thought that was great. That part of these techniques can also be about, enhancing our, methods of resistance, and, drumming and singing, and sharing that across, a whole group of people is really important. I've also been writing some positive things about myself. So writing a positive data log is what they call it. So writing the positive things that you are also, see in yourself, but also your achievements, but also what people say, that they enjoy about you, that you bring, and listening to those stories rather than, kind of going, oh yeah, that person really likes me, but they wouldn't really really know what's going on. Really listening to people's stories. So one of the things that in kind of meditation and compassion focused therapy that they talk about is bold. Let's see if I can write in here. So BOLD stands for, just while that's loading, breathe, observe, listen, and decide. So breathe and notice what's going on in your world. Breathe and notice what is happening for you right now. And being able to kind of connect with the present and being present. Observing who you are and what your story is about yourself. Who are you? What are your big values? What do you like about yourself? What do you not like about yourself? Writing all those things down, observing what your story is, listening though to what other people say about you and what their stories are about you. People have been telling me recently, as we've been going through an industrial dispute at the university, that I'm an inspiration, that I listen to people and I mirror the audience. Whatever their kind of emotional mood is, I tend to then change the way that I speak. I hadn't realized that I do that. I'm listening to those stories that people tell me, and saying, okay, maybe my story that I have about myself doesn't match what other people are saying. Does that mean that I should change my behavior? Or does that mean that I should listen more and realize that I do have positive qualities that maybe I haven't paid attention to and haven't valued in myself yet? And then decide to act in a way that matches your values. Decide to act in a way that you want people to see you as. And again, you're listening to those differences between the stories, because either you are seeing yourself more negatively, or you haven't paid attention to those things that people are saying about you, or because you didn't realize that the way that you were acting was different from the way that people were perceiving you. And either that requires a change over time, or maybe that requires no change in the way that you decide to behave over time. But I think that, this kind of like noticing, again, it's making a mental note of the way that people perceive you and the way that you want to live your life going forward. And making those decisions. And I think, making that decision, even if you can't make it happen right away, I think even making that conscious, this is the way I want to be in the future, is going to be hugely important. And I think noticing that over time. So I have a 5-year kind of taking stock of where I've been and how I've progressed. And I do that every year. I kind of go through and go, okay, well, what did I achieve in the last year? What do I want to do going forward? How do I decide to live going forward? And this all also relates to expressive writing. So we know that expressive writing is related to a decrease in distress a decrease in depression, but also has been related to people getting a job. So when people have been laid off of work and they engage in expressive writing, they're more often getting a job quickly than people who don't do any expressive writing. So expressive writing is you take 2 minutes out of your day and you just write whatever comes to you. It's very, kind of free thinking, write whatever it is. Right before bed is often a good time for people because it's kind of like the time when they're reflecting on their day. It doesn't even matter if you write it down with pen and paper. Jamie Pennebaker, who is the one who kind of came up with expressive writing, said that he's done it with his finger. As he's in bed, he'll just write in the air if you don't want to have something on paper. One of the exercises that I've also done is doing expressive writing in my non-dominant language. So I've written about how I felt about being a mother in Spanish, and I got totally different thoughts coming out than when I was writing it in English. And I found that was really interesting. So, writing expressively in a different language that you might have. Again, it's a reflection exercise. It's not meant to change anything. It's really to make you aware of the things that you are thinking currently. One of the other things that I teach is bystander interventions. And, being an activist in your work and in your personal life, and learning about, different ways to be, an ally, and truly be an active ally, and using bystander intervention for that. And I can do a whole other thing on that. But if you look up some bystander intervention techniques, they're really important. So as I was saying, nature, as you guys were saying, talking to people, expressive writing. Anything else? Exercise, drumming. One of the other things that I found really useful, I listen to music, and then I pick an instrument and I move only to that instrument. So I just brought up this song right before, and you can choose either the trumpet, the piano, the guitar, and you can move to different ones, and then that you're paying attention to that, and you can't do other things at the same time as you're paying attention to a particular instrument and just moving when that comes on, or just moving your finger when that comes on. So for example, this one's a good one, Superstition by Stevie Wonder. It's got like a drum. Maybe you just do the drum and you're bopping to that. Or maybe you're just going. So there's different things that you can do with that. If you like dancing, just paying attention to different parts of the song. And that way that you're not, thinking about whether you left the iron on or whether you've got a paper coming in that you need to publish soon or anything like that. So it's a good distraction exercise as well. The other book that I'm reading that I said I was going to show you guys. So I'm only halfway through this, but The Compassionate Mind, around finding self-compassion. I was a bit worried that it was going to be, again, something about, I'm lacking in self-compassion. I need to have self-compassion. And again, an individualistic thing. But actually, it starts out with context. It starts out with context of, pandemics, structural inequality, poverty and differences around the world. So it does recognize that and still says, that there's still ways for you to have self-compassion, even in a world where it's very, there's inequality and discrimination. I thought that was good that it, recognized the kind of context in which people might be finding themselves, and that the context could still be wrong, but you can still have self-compassion and well-being and flourish while still being an activist, and still trying to change things.